like a lot of supernatural baloney to me.
Supernatural, perhaps. Baloney, perhaps not.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. We have got for you a very special program planned today. We have listeners across the board that have asked us to put together a comprehensive episode that is all Theater of the Mind. And these are some of the most popular and most requested episodes of Theater of the Mind. So we hope that you enjoy it. Please sit back, turn down the lights, turn up your radio, and enjoy today's Theater of the Minds. I remember the day, a true life encounter, a very hard decision. The rest of our day was uneventful and Mom eventually calmed down. The following morning, as a family, we went to say goodbye to Aunt Evie. The stroke was extensive, and she was completely unresponsive and living only with the aid of machines. It was November 22nd in Dallas. We sat in the room, taking turn holding Aunt Evie's hands, saying our goodbyes and sharing fond memories and our fair share of tears. When suddenly, the hospital sprang to life. There were cries from down the hall. Doctors and nurses filled the rooms. All eyes were on the TV. It was about 12:40 p.m., and news was being reported that JFK had been shot and was in transit to the hospital. We exchanged baffled looks. Our mouths hung open in pure confusion. It was exactly 24 hours since we received that call from Aunt Evie. My comatose aunt? The one that didn't have a phone in her room? That called to tell us Kennedy had been shot and was dead. One day before it happened. Like the rest of the world, we sat transfixed to the TV, KRLD in Dallas, watching the story unfold before our very eyes. We were aghast as the sound of police sirens screamed outside the hospital. They were bringing the president here, to Parkland Memorial, where Aunt Evie lay in a comatose state.
Walter Cronkite in our newsroom, and there has been an attempt, as perhaps you know now, on the life of President Kennedy. He was wounded in an automobile driving from Dallas Airport into downtown Dallas, along with Governor Connolly of Texas. They've been taken to Parkland Hospital there, where their condition is as yet unknown. We have not been told their condition. At Dallas, in the downtown hotel room, a group had been gathered to hear President Kennedy when he was waiting his arrival. Let's switch down there now, where Eddie Barker of KRLD is on the air.
As you can imagine, there are many stories that are coming in now as to the actual condition of the president. One is that he is dead. This cannot be confirmed. Another is that Governor Connolly is in the operating room. This we have not confirmed. The president was whisked from the scene of the attempted assassination or assassination, depending upon his condition, of course, at this hour, by bus to Parkland Hospital, and the president undoubtedly is in the emergency room at that hospital, which would be on the first floor of Parkland. No word is yet. We are awaiting something more official. It is, of course, difficult, certainly, to go on scanty reports.
Within 30 minutes of arriving, Aunt Evie let out a gurgling sob, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Then she slipped away. Our attention turned back to the television set and newscaster Walter Cronkite.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
That day in Dallas, Texas, we lost a true American, someone that stood for all the things that are good and right in the world. Love, family, and commitment to our country. Oh yeah, we lost our president too. I will never forget where I was that day, or the day before Kennedy was killed. Battle of Bigfoot. A personal encounter shared by a listener that wishes to remain anonymous. I awoke with a start. The normal tranquil silence that I enjoyed at my hunting cabin was shattered with a sound that still haunts me to this day. It sounded
like a large bear and something else fighting for its life somewhere off in the distance. I sprang out of bed, my room barely lit with the soft, muted colors of early morning, threw on my pants, quickly slipped my feet into my boots, and without lacing them, I grabbed my shotgun and headed outside to see what all the commotion was. I had been visiting this cabin in these woods for years and had never heard something like this before. I ran towards the sound of the attack, the sounds of twigs and branches snapping as I made my way through the woods, huffing and puffing. I was quickly reminded how out of shape I had gotten. Then, there opened a small clearing ahead, and what I saw was unimaginable. I refused to even tell my friends this story because I know how insane it sounds, but I also know what I saw that day. Locked in mortal battle was one of the largest black bears I'd ever seen, and it was being mauled by something even larger, something horrifying. There was a battle royale unfolding before my unbelieving eyes. A black bear and Bigfoot entrenched in a knockdown, drag-em-out fight to the finish. The sound at this point was deafening. The bear's growls and howls reached epic proportions. The beast it grappled with, howling and grunting so loud as it tried to keep its arms and hands clear of the bear's angry jaws. I wondered what would cause this to happen, and I saw my answer. Not 10 feet away from me, a small bear cub cowering as its mother fought valiantly to protect her child. The Bigfoot creature must have caught them by surprise and come between mama and baby, prompting an all-out war. I watched in utter horror. It was like every B-grade movie I watched growing up. This would be the closest to King Kong vs. Godzilla I would ever witness in person. The bear howled as it struggled against Bigfoot's grasp. The giant creature opened its mouth and clamped down on the bear's neck as it held the bear from behind. The bear cried out in agony as the Sasquatch struggled to keep the upper hand on its foe. In a surprise move, the bear threw itself forward into an awkward somersault which sent the behemoth behind him flying forward as smashing to the ground with a thunderous crash. The bear took advantage of the stunned adversary and sprung into action, leaping on the head and shoulders of Bigfoot and its entire 800-pound frame growling this strange, sustained, burping Wookiee noise. It pounced repeatedly up and down on the Sasquatch, looking like it was trying to break its back. The creature bellowed again in agonizing pain and pushed hard against the ground to try to right itself between pounces from one ornery, smoky bear. Then, the worst possible thing happened. The baby bear let out a series of cries, and Mama stopped her attack and turned. That's when she saw me. Within 10 feet of her bear cub, she lowered her head and began to charge. I lifted my shotgun and fired a round into the sky with the hopes that this would scare Mama and baby off. The bear was not deterred and kept its rampage towards my direction. That's when the Bigfoot sprang up and jumped on the back of the moving bear and with all its might pulled back on the beast's head. And then I heard a sickening, muted crack, like a large wet limb from a tree popping, and the bear collapsed. I was still a good 40 yards or so away as I watched the Bigfoot rain down hammering blows to the back of the bear to finish it off. I slowly backed up and watched in amazement. The little bear let out with a whelping noise, and the Sasquatch turned its attention to our direction. And it looked mad. Well, that's all I had to see. I took off running back to the cabin as fast as I could, wishing I would have laced the damn boots I was wearing, especially as I tried to hurdle some debris of logs and branches, and the loopy laces caught one and sent me crashing to the ground. I literally ran out of my boots in pursuit of safety. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it. I could hear the cries and screams of the young cub as it met its untimely demise at the hands of a very irritable Bigfoot. I stayed in my cabin the rest of the day and decided it was safer to stay inside. Then, I planned to venture back out the next day. I would plan a return to the site of the battlegrounds and take some pictures as I knew my friends would never believe me without them. That night, I barely slept, as I kept hearing the sound of loud thumping and grunting from outside. At one point, I heard glass shattering, followed by loud whoops and bellows. When morning finally broke, I peeked out of the cabin window to see my car, and it was in rough shape. Something had been pounding huge dents into the hood and roof, and thrown a massive rock through my windshield. I decided against returning to the spot I saw the fight take place, and reevaluated the fact that maybe that was Bigfoot territory, and the bears entered his space, and that may be what led to the attack. All I know is this thing did not want me there either, so I loaded up the car and I got the hell out of there. It's been about 5 years now. I never returned, but I do look online to see if there have been any Bigfoot encounters in the area. There have been a few reported sightings, mostly fleeting, but nothing like what I witnessed. I often lay awake replaying the events of that early morning and realize just how lucky I was to have not been the original target of a rampaging Bigfoot, and utterly frightened and in awe of the raw power it displayed in wrestling and killing an 8-foot, 800-pound black bear. The Implant. The true story of Harold Tucker. I live in a cabin in the woods in the Pacific Northwest and have always and always will be an outdoorsman. I've read everything I could find on encounters with Bigfoot in our region and spoken to many of the old-timers that have claimed to have had run-ins with the big fella. You would think, with all the time I spend outdoors, I would have accidentally bumped into the guy by now. Well, I have never had any encounters with ghosts, Bigfoot, or anything to do with what people refer to as the paranormal. Not for lack of trying, just didn't seem to be a part of my experience in this lifetime. Well, that changed in 1998. I was settled in for the night, a Saturday as I recall. I'd spent the better part of the day outside chopping wood, cutting branches, and clearing some dead trees from my property, trying to clear a nice patch of sky out around my home so on beautiful nights I could enjoy a fire and cast my gaze into the wonder of the starry skies that wrap themselves so lovingly around this part of the country. Deep, rich black skies, sprinkled with twinkling wonder from faraway galaxies as far as the eye could see. I sat quietly, sipping some coffee, comforted by the crackling of the fire burning bright in my yard, my eyes focused into the night sky, breathing in the cool, crisp air, when I heard what sounded like someone or something walking around behind me in the woods. I turned slowly in my chair and waited for my eyes to adjust to the light difference, and then I let out with a bellow. "Go on! Get on out of here! Go!" I figured it would spook off whatever woodland creature was drawn to the charismatic light flickering through the heavily wooded area surrounding my house. I then saw what looked to be a few small outlines of kids running between the trees. I was put off. It was 9:30 at night, so not entirely too late for kids to be up, but it seemed much too late and dangerous to be screwing around in the woods without flashlights. I wasn't too concerned about being jumped, as I could tell by their size. They were more than likely the 10 and 12-year-old that lived up the road from me. "Hey, it's kind of late for you kids to be jerking around out here in the dark. Better get your butts home before I call your parents," I commanded. Well, with that, I could hear the two scramble off to God knows where. I was once again enveloped in the sounds of the woods. An owl hooted high from a tree perch, the fire crackling with the normal pops and hisses. But my two onlookers had fled. After another 30 minutes or so, I doused the fire with a bucket of water I kept on hand for just this purpose. I stomped on the still glowing embers to ensure the fire was safely out before retreating to the comfort of my home. Once inside, I closed the heavily wooded door. I snapped the lock into place and slid the bolt lock to secure the door. I washed up, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. I wasn't there for more than about 5 to 10 minutes when I noticed lights, like large flashlight beams bouncing around outside my windows, casting bizarre shadows across my room. Now, this continued for another 15 minutes or so, and I thought, well, enough is enough. These little brats need to go home. Then, I heard the sudden and alarming bang from my front door. Like something heavy and with purpose struck the door once. Then it came again, this time 3 hard crashes. Bang! 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 I stood up and I crossed the floor to my bedroom door, made my way across the living room, and waited to hear who or what was going on outside. Who's there?" I yelled. "You damn kids better go home, or I'm going to be calling your parents." Then, to my surprise, another 2 bangs shook the door. Bang! Bang! I stepped back in a state of confusion and shock. I was trying to figure out my next move when I saw the doorknob begin to jiggle, and with utter amazement, watched the small handle lock slowly turn itself to the unlocked position. Then the door rattled in its frame as something pushed against the door again. I was baffled as how they had unlocked the door. Then remembered the extra key I kept under the milk can on my front porch. Stupid. That's what I thought to myself. I have to hide that damn thing better. Then my heart stopped as I stood there, watching as the bolt lock on the inside began to slide to the unlocked position. I recall thinking through how they unlocked the handle with the extra key, but this made no sense. The doorknob began to turn, and I stood there frozen, unsure whether to run or stand my ground. The handle popped, and the door was ready to be open. Then there was silence. A silence I did not like at all. I readied myself to run at the intruder to take them off guard when they opened the door. Then all at once it happened. The door swung wide open, and my room was filled with a bright light and a very loud crackling noise. Then I felt something hit me, and everything went black as I fell to the floor. I awoke a few hours later, stiff and sore, and presumably in the same fashion I had fallen unconscious, crumpled in a heap on the floor. To my surprise, the door was closed, the handle was locked, and the latch was again closed from the inside. Now, I did a quick scan of my home, walking room to room, lighting each room up as I entered them, and found no one there and nothing out of place. I couldn't begin to even comprehend how this happened. That's when I reached up and rubbed my aching head, and I found a strange bump. I headed to the bathroom to assess the damage and found a raised bump on my forehead above my left eyebrow. I reached up to poke at it with my finger just to measure the wound, and as my finger approached it, the damn thing moved. I must have hit myself really good. I swore I saw the bump move slightly to avoid my prodding. What in the hell? I tried again and it shifted back to its original spot. I finally outsmarted the bump and placed fingers on each side like I was preparing to pop a zit, and I felt a vibration under the skin. Something hard, something was right there. It felt thick like a long-grain piece of rice. I squeezed and it buzzed and my head began sweating like I was on fire. The vibration was harsh and I continued to squeeze harder. Then something long and dark began to emerge from the middle of the bump. I grabbed the tweezers off the bathroom sink and quickly clamped down on it. I gave a short, hard pull and it burst out of the bump in my forehead, and I was sent quickly down to my knees. The pain was unreal, searing, throbbing from the lump on my head, and I heard this loud, ear-piercing squeal fill the air. I slammed my hands to my ears to cut off the sound, and it finally subsided. I searched the ground near the tweezers for whatever had popped out. I searched and searched. I eventually grabbed my vacuum cleaner, popped in a fresh bag, and slowly, methodically began sweeping the floor with it, waiting to hear something or to investigate the bag after a full cleaning. Then I heard the ping, like a bobby pin being grabbed by the vacuum. Ah, success. Then the vacuum let out a horrendous grinding noise and stopped. I flicked the switch, turned it off, fearful that I was going to burn the motor out. I turned the machine to its side and sought the culprit causing the noise. There it was, lodged in the roller like a metal thorn. I gave it a yank and was surprised to feel it vibrating between my fingers. I grabbed a pill bottle out of my medicine cabinet and poured the pills onto the counter. I crammed the item into the bottle and screwed the top back into place. Then I gave the container a shake and I could see it bounce around inside the plastic prison I had sent it to. My head was killing me, my body was sore, and I swallowed a handful of aspirin and climbed into bed to ride this headache out. I placed the container on the bedstand and fell quickly to sleep. When I woke in the morning, I sat up in wonder. Had I dreamt it all? My hand moving over my forehead to find the small knot still there and tender to the touch. Well, I thought, at least I got that part right. I turned to the place I had placed the bottle with the offending item in it, and it was missing. I looked everywhere, and after a few hours of confounded feelings, I decided to hop in the car to go to town to see the doc and get myself checked. When I opened the door and crossed the porch, I found the pill bottle that I had used to contain the implant laying there, discarded. The top was off and thrown 2 feet further. I snapped the bottle up, and it was empty. I dropped to my knees and looked everywhere, and it was nowhere to be found. I have no idea what the hell happened to me that night. I never saw the lights or the childlike beings again anywhere near my property. It wasn't until months later, when sitting at a local dive bar with some regulars, that I heard the conversation about the night a few months ago that they had seen strange lights in the sky. They began to describe the area, and it was right near my property. They described large triangle craft that from time to time would emit light beams, large bright light beams, straight down to the ground. Then after a bit, they just seemed to take off and they've never been seen again.
We hope you're enjoying today's special presentation of Theater of the Mind, all of our favorite and bizarre stories collected in one long episode just for you. The Mantis Encounter of Hawaii, a story shared by Bill Murphy, formerly of the hit TV sci-fi channel series Fact or Fake, The Paranormal Files. I would like to share with you an unusual encounter I had in 2007 that occurred on the Big Island of Hawaii. I booked a week at a resort called Kalani, which is a beautiful slice of paradise, where I met another 50 to 60 people who were there for a metaphysical retreat. I was drawn to the conference since I was using electroencephalograms for several years to measure the difference in brainwave frequencies of people who claim to have an expanded awareness, including developing a sixth sense after intense meditation. Now, since there was a series of classes offered throughout the conference that involved meditation, I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn some of the techniques used to quiet the mind, and perhaps have access to willing test subjects for my own research. However, after preparing for this adventure, I decided to throw myself into the experience and leave my cumbersome EEG home, as it was clear to me this wouldn't be a journey to obtain data. Instead, this would be an opportunity to participate in what had been practiced for thousands of years, long before people relied on technology to validate their claims. The weather was blustery and unstable when I arrived, and the mist from the sea, coupled with high winds, added to the excitement. I liked the atmosphere, but the driver of the van that picked us up from the airport seemed slightly nervous. As we entered the resort and I could see people were trying to secure canopies and tents throughout the grounds, I had rented a bungalow which had 2 solid walls and 2 exterior walls built of screens with floor-to-ceiling blinds. I liked the space a lot. The large, fearless lizards were crawling across the screens and staring back at me. The humid breeze flooded the entire bungalow, and even when the rain came and went on that first night, I didn't mind at all when the interior became damp. Being totally connected with nature, I was looking forward to whatever the organizers of the event had planned. I tossed my suitcase on the floor, and as dusk came, I headed to the center of the grounds, where a huge campfire was illuminating the lush greenery and people's faces. With sparks flying up and flickering flames casting shadows everywhere, people's faces were shifting, as only the light from a fire can create. We were all moths being drawn to the flames, and everyone was greeting each other while scanning their surroundings, knowing we all were going to be a part of something special. It felt mysterious, maybe even slightly dangerous, with the burning logs snapping and the flames crackling. Eventually, everyone melted away into the night, heading to their tents and lodges. The next morning, the blowing of the conch signaled the first meal of the day was being served. A superb menu was posted in the outdoor cafeteria, and an assortment of Hawaiian cuisine was offered. It was all healthy and very satisfying. Several rows of long tables ensured you would be breaking bread with people you hadn't known before, but would seem like old friends by the end of the meal. The organizers pointed to the signs posted with various classes and workshops, and I signed up for several during the days and nights throughout the week. One class was titled Portal Building, and 8 of us added our names to the roster. For the first few days, I attended large workshops and some of the smaller classes when I learned basic meditation methods. There is an unexpected surprise when you become mindful or conscious of the moment you are in. What begins as quiet introspection ends with a sudden rush of information about your surroundings near and far. It's the complete opposite of being attention deficit, and my ability to see and hear everything drastically improved as I worked to quiet my own inner voice. During the times I was not in a scheduled class, I explored Kalani. I could hear the waves hitting the ever-changing coastline of the island, and I ventured into an overgrown area where I found a trail leading to the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The volcanic basalt creates beautiful black beaches and cliffs, topped with green vegetation. I found a large swing, easily wide enough for 2 people, and swung on it despite the fact I seemed to go slightly past the cliff with at least an 80-foot drop to the sea. After I had my fill, I stopped the swing and looked at the painting on it.
I believe it said, "This magical place," and other words I couldn't decipher. I then heard the not-too-distant sounds of bongo drums. I ambled toward the drum beats and found two people. One was teaching the other to drum with several different percussion instruments. It was an instructor from Kalani, and I signed up for an hour-long spontaneous class on tribal drumming. It was all so perfect, and just what I had hoped Hawaii would be like. During all of this, there were the shifting winds and the constant mist that never seemed to be a bother at all, even when the tropical rain would suddenly drench everything. After several days, the evening of the portal building class had arrived. Those that signed up met at the designated sculpture in the center of the retreat, and we were led to a sweat lodge in a slightly secluded area. It is a low, round structure built with volcanic rocks that is open on two sides, but you have to duck to enter, and it's best to sit once inside. There was no electricity, and we needed flashlights to see. Once everyone was comfortable, our session began with ohms, which is a type of chant that has a synchronizing effect on a group of people. This falls into a natural rhythm followed by silence, and then more ohms, etc. Now, some people open and close their eyes intermittently, but the effect is very calming. After nearly 40 minutes of this, several of us slightly opened our eyes, but not saying a word. I realized those with their eyes open, including myself, were looking at the section of the curved wall that had the same simple black cloth that is used to cover the two openings. At first, it seemed to look like fireflies had entered the sweat lodge, as it looked like tiny twinkling lights. But then they began to swirl in a rotating pattern that started to speed up and take on a purple hue. The swirling lights deepened in color and the circular pattern enlarged, with another triangular shape forming in the center. It was then that the image began to become clear. The shape I was seeing was that of a mantis head, but it was made of the same purple light. Although it was now clearly defined, it appeared to be approximately 18 inches across, and parts of the large upright body were also visible. The head moved from side to side, scanning all 8 of us. Within minutes, it faded away. No one said a word the whole time until someone whispered, "Perhaps we should exit the sweat lodge." We all scrambled without hesitation and stood outside of the structure looking at each other, waiting for anyone to speak. Finally, one person asked, "What was that?" I believe none of us wanted to admit what we saw because each of us had no way of knowing what the others had seen, if anything. Another person finally said she thought she saw what looked like a giant insect. "Yes!" several of us blurted out. But as it turned out, this giant purple mantis that poked its scary head out of a swirling vortex was seen by 5 of the 8 that were there. Those that saw it didn't feel threatened, but this type of sighting was not your average occurrence, which made it frightening. Although I have had an interest in studying enduring mysteries for many years, I was not familiar with creatures like this before, but have since read about others who have seen what many people call the mantis head aliens. I don't know if they're extraterrestrial, interdimensional, a shared ancient memory, or perhaps hallucinations of some sort. What I can say is that this conference was about healthy living, with 3 square meals a day, proper rest and exercise, and expanding the mind using centuries-old natural techniques. I did go back to the sweat lodge the next day to examine it thoroughly, looking closely at the rocks and black cloths while taking several photographs. There was absolutely nothing unusual about any of it. I'll never forget that portal building class I participated in with those other people, and the mantis head that we experienced in Hawaii. The 5 of us saw the giant mantis. We're all now bonded in a way that only a life-changing experience like this can accomplish. The weather had become very calm as I left the island, but you never really leave Hawaii. A piece of you always remains, calling you back. Being a fan of ghost hunting shows and wishing I could have my own experience, I was lured by the temptation of buying a so-called haunted item. So of course I immediately went to the most credible site I could find for such things, eBay. I searched for months looking for just the right item. I didn't want something big and gaudy, and all the ghost-infested dolls that popped up just looked the same. Some form of old-looking female doll in old clothes. Always the same look, the same vibe, and nothing I really wanted to take a chance on. Until one day, as I was scrolling through the choices, a figure popped up that caught my attention. It was an old, carved ventriloquist dummy. a creepy-looking figure, something straight out of a horror movie, so I was hooked. I read the tale. This dummy was reportedly used as a vessel during occult rituals to move energy forms from one physical form to another. Immediately I thought, this joker has seen one too many Child's Play movies, but it supposedly had voices manifesting from it, strange smells that would appear and disappear, and more otherworldly phenomena, so I decided, what the hell. At least it wasn't the same old-looking dolls with the same lame stories I had read before, and it was freaky enough looking that I would effectively weird out any of my friends that came to visit, and it would be a conversation starter, that was a sure bet. After I won the creepy creation, I received 2 very bizarre emails from the seller, both wondering if I wanted to back out of the transaction. They were feeling guilty passing this on to me. They had bought it at some strange thrift shop in San Francisco and had been told the story of the figure but never bought into it. They just liked the look of this detailed old mannequin. But, without going into detail, said it was the biggest mistake they had ever made. I assured them, listen, you did your job, you sold me, you can stop with the overkill. Well, 7 days later, a large package was delivered to my door. I was very excited and had been bragging up my purchase for days to coworkers and friends, mostly trying to solicit some kind of reaction. Most of my friends and coworkers just rolled their eyes and told me I was a sucker. I opened the box and was astonished to see that the figure was much larger than I thought from the pictures. I assumed it would be a couple feet tall. This thing was nearly 4.5 feet tall and so much more creepy looking in person. It was beautifully crafted, but I wondered why they would make something so damn freaky looking. Now, imagine the weirdest dummy you've ever seen, multiply it by 100. If the craftsman was going for creepy, he achieved it. Picture Annabelle from the Conjuring movie, only ugly, scarier, and her brother. Now, I proudly displayed my purchase on the entertainment center in my living room right next to my TV, and then I waited, patiently. But after 3 weeks, nothing. Damn, I'd been fooled right out of $265, and the kicker was the previous owner gave me 2 chances to back out, and I was too stupid to take him up on it. I grew tired of looking at his menacing devil-like appearance and smile staring at me, mocking me, so I threw him in my guest bedroom and scolded the ugly thing, saying, "Yeah, some big bad demon vessel you turned out to be. You're just $265 worth of ugly." Then I slammed the door and headed off to bed. Now, as you can guess, things changed in my place real quick. I don't know if it was my stern chastising or locking it away that pissed it off, but suddenly it was in the mood to play, and it meant business. I woke up that first night to what sounded like a barroom brawl had broken out in my guest bedroom. Bangs, muffled shouts, and something heavy pounding the walls. I lay there trying to convince myself this was a dream or that I was hearing something from my neighbors upstairs. Finally, I got the courage up to go to the guest room, after turning every light on in the place, of course. Then I threw open the door. There, sitting totally upright on the bed, was the dummy. Nothing in the room was disturbed, nothing broken, but the way it sat straight up with its head tilted downward, slightly giving the menacing appearance that it was scowling at me from under its unhappy brow, that's what creeped me to the core. I, of course, did what any rational human would do and yelled, "Well, F you!" at the ugly thing and finished by saying, "Knock it off! I'm trying to sleep!" Then I turned in a huff and slammed the door. When the door slammed, I was caught off guard by what sounded like a deep voice barked back, "No! F you!" I don't think I slept a wink that rest of the night, and I left every light in the place on for the remainder of the evening. I was sure what had happened, and what I had heard had to have come from upstairs, and I was half awake and half asleep, so I must have just been imagining what I heard. Well, eventually, sunlight broke and filled my apartment. I hopped in the shower, and when I turned my back to the stream of hot water, my back seized in pain, like someone had just dragged one of those 3-pronged garden tools down my back, hard and fast. At first, I thought it was hotter than usual water, until I saw the drops of blood hitting the floor of the shower. When I got out and looked in the mirror, it looked like someone carved a damn tic-tac-toe board on my back, and a few of the deeper scratches were trickling blood. I was officially freaked, hurried my morning ritual up, and got the hell out of there. When I got to work, I started telling my coworkers what had happened, and had a mix of gasps and eye rolls sent my way. Then, my cell lit up. I was getting a call. From home. Seriously, what the? Was I losing my mind? I answered and said, "Who the hell is this and how did you get into my apartment?" There was nothing, just a background hum and static. Then it disconnected. I showed my coworkers and suddenly everyone was as shocked as I was. A bit later, my cell began to vibrate again. I looked down and was relieved that the call was not coming from my home until I answered it. It was the apartment manager, and they were calling to let me know they were in my apartment with the police. A neighbor reported what sounded like female voices screaming from inside and lots of banging noises. They had found nothing when they entered, and nothing was amiss, but they thought I should know that if I had left a TV on a timer or something, I shouldn't do that anymore. What was I going to say? No TV on a timer, just a demon-infested dummy in my guest room. I left for home that day terrified of what might be waiting for me when I got in. I checked to make sure nothing was broken and decided to confront my unhappy house guest. I opened the door, and he was nowhere to be seen. The bed was empty, the room was empty, the closet was empty, and then I heard what can only be described as a chilling, slow laugh come from behind me. I turned. Nothing was there. Then it came again. I realized it was coming from under the goddamn bed. Oh, hell no. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed my broom, and came back into the room. Laid on the ground and began digging under the bed with the broom handle to try and push the frickin' thing out. I had no clue what I was going to do once I got it out from under the bed, but I sure as hell was not going to bend down, get close, and look. I've seen far too many horror movies and knew this thing would just grab me or something equally terrifying. No matter how I batted at the thing, it would not come out from under the bed. Then it let out with a childlike voice saying, "Let's play." I dropped the broom, stood up, walked out of the room like a boss. Hell no, part 2. Now, I was really frantic. I decided this was going to end right now before I lost my mind. Years of supernatural flooded my memories, and I thought, get the rock salt. I grabbed my old suitcase from the front closet, took off to a metaphysical shop, and asked for a bucket of rock salt. The girl behind the counter started laughing and said, "Okay, did Sam or Dean send you?" We both shared a laugh, and I told her what had happened. She went to work gathering stuff from every corner of the shop. Rock salt, sage, Florida water, and this long red rope that she said was for binding. She quickly informed me of what needed to be done and how to do it, so I took my collection of odds and ends and headed home, remembering the final words she said, "Do not show fear." Oh, I was ready to do battle. I got home, stood before the door of the guest room with steely determination and reached for the knob. Then the knob moved on its own, and just before my hand had grasped it, it rattled back and forth. I knew it was trying to screw with me and get the upper hand, so I put my hand on the knob and triumphantly yelled out, "You gotta go, my man!" The door popped open. Nothing had changed. The broom handle was still under the bed where I laid it, and the doll was nowhere in sight. I gave the room a quick once-over again, just to make sure that when I was down trying to fish this thing out from under the bed, it wouldn't jump out of a closet and drag me to some parallel universe. The doll was nowhere to be found, which meant the little prick was still hiding underneath my bed. I got down, thrust my hands under the bed, grabbing for it, and when my hands bumped it, I swear it moved to try to get away. I held on for all I was worth, dragged the son of a bitch out, and quickly started wrapping the red rope around the figure, binding its arms to its body and legs together, when I felt something bite me, and a muffled laugh came out of it. I channeled my strong inner black woman. For the record, I'm a white boy with red hair. I channeled that strong inner black woman and yelled out, "Oh no, you didn't!" I threw him into the open and waiting suitcase, poured the rock salt on him, read the prayer of St. Michael, and slammed the suitcase shut, latching it. Then I lit the sage stick and started waving it around the room and under the bed to clear the space. I dragged the suitcase out to my car, threw it in the trunk, drove as fast as I could to the bridge in town, all the while hearing something screaming, a muffled, angry scream. When I got to the bridge, I jumped out and ceremoniously threw it as far as I could out to the waiting water below. The girl in the shop said to do so because this would keep it bound and me protected from what was inside. Something to do with the rope, the salt, and running water. I didn't care enough about the science of it. I just wanted the end result. I wanted this freak fest over. The suitcase hit the water, and damn it, it floated. Now what? Truthfully, I didn't care. I jumped my frightened ass back in the car and took off like a bat out of hell, secure in the fact that I was rid of my possessed pal once and for all. I can't tell you the kind of relief I felt driving home. Happy as hell to be rid of it. Somewhat guilty feeling, I've got to be honest, that someone else might find it, but it was gone. Gone out of my life, and that was all that mattered. I pulled into my parking spot and felt my phone vibrate. I pulled it out of my pocket and felt the overwhelming wave of defeat pound me. Because the call was coming from inside my apartment. Innovation, creation, vitality, and joy are the pulse of MySoultopia.com, with many custom creations for the mind, body, and spirit, along with classes, intuitive sessions, coaching, and healing energies. MySoultopia.com strives to bring sophistication with a twist to the metaphysical and the holistic market, while raising the community's vibration and channeling the new paradigm, which means new and exciting adventures for all. MySoultopia.com is utopia for your soul. Visit MySoultopia.com, your one-stop shop for all your metaphysical needs, offering hand-selected crystals and crystal jewelry with prices to fit every budget. MySoultopia.com offers the best selections of tarot and divination cards by top designers, expertly curated and award-winning book collections from top authors on every subject you'll need on your spiritual journey. MySoultopia is also proud to offer the finest singing bowls and an eclectic collection of the most amazing gemstones, crystals, and crystal jewelry from the top metaphysical designers in the world. MySoultopia.com is always your one-stop shop for award-winning mixes of Florida water, sage spray, and other spiritual protection. So begin your journey with the best resource, MySoultopia.com. That's MySoultopia.com. Why mess with the rest when you can start with the best? MySoultopia.com. Again, that's MySoultopia.com. The Demon Doll of Denver. The True Life Account by Linda Dawson. In the summer of 1977, a small house on the outskirts of our town burned to the ground, killing a little girl, her mother, and father. The only survivor was the brother, a boy just a few years older than me. It was a sad time and on the tips of everyone's tongues for months to come. The brother explained that his little sister had an unhealthy fascination with fire, and they were always rushing around to put out a new blaze she had started. This time, they weren't as lucky, and the flames engulfed the family home and left a black mark on our sleepy little neighborhood. Being 11 at the time, my friends and I set out to go explore the rubble. One day, a week or so after the tragedy, as we kicked around the piles of charred wood and burned belongings, you couldn't help but feel sad at such a loss of life. Surprisingly, amongst the debris was a doll, about 12 inches tall, just sitting there, sad and lonely without a home or a little girl to love her. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but it was the only thing not covered by the black, sooty aftermath. I scooped her up and decided to keep her, in memory of a little girl who had died too soon. The smell of the burnt-out husk of a house stuck in my nose for hours, sometimes almost making me gag. I couldn't get the thought of the little girl and her family out of my mind. How scary it must have been, how painful it was, and when it was all said and done, all that remained was this doll. I placed the doll on my bookshelf alongside a few other dolls and knickknacks. She looked much older than my other dolls and seemed out of place, but it was a reminder, and one I would come to find would be a very painful reminder. That night I woke up startled. I couldn't figure out why or how I had been aroused from sleep so abruptly. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The house was quiet. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom and confidently strode across my darkened bedroom when my foot caught on something. It sent me ass over tea kettle, and I landed with a thud and a sharp, sickening pain in my left arm. At first it was numb, then it throbbed, then pain came crashing in like a tidal wave, and I let out a howl that woke my parents from a deep sleep. They ran in to check on me and found me sprawled on the floor, clutching my left arm and wailing in pain. When the light came on, I could finally see what had sent me to my painful crash. The doll had fallen off my shelf, and I had tripped over it. Even through the pain and tears, I thought it was strange. The doll was not very large or heavy, but when my foot caught on it, it felt like an anchored tree root. I never even felt the doll move as my foot crossed its path. Now, the rest of the night was spent in the local ER, where I was told the bone in my left arm had snapped. They call it a spiral fracture, and they casted me up. When I got home and climbed into bed, I quickly looked to the floor to warn my parents to be careful as they left the room and not trip over the doll, but she wasn't there. She was perched back on the shelf where she had fallen from. I figured Mom or Dad must have picked her up and placed her back on the shelf earlier during my fitful, tearful fest. The next few days were quiet at home. Nothing out of the ordinary except the fact that my dog, our Irish setter Rusty, would not enter my room, seeking love and attention as he always had. Instead, he would stand just outside the door, or lay there pathetically looking up at me but refusing to enter. I then had a very disturbing experience. I snatched the doll from the shelf and laid across my bed, my head at the foot of my bed and my feet where my head belonged, and I stared at the doll. I thought it was funny. After sitting in all that burned out remains for nearly a week, this doll was very clean and had no smoky smell. A smell that still lingered on our block for what felt like forever. Then, as I looked into its eyes, I noticed something that made my heart stop. My eyes were as wide as saucers when I noticed. In the reflection of her big, glassy brown eyes, a little girl was standing in my doorway. I flipped around with a gasp, and to my utter astonishment, there was no one there. I was absolutely freaked out. I climbed to the head of my bed, put my back firmly against it, and called out, "Is someone there? Hello?" Rusty ambled to the doorframe and stopped. He lowered his head, and low, grumbling snarls started. I felt a wave of sickness come over me. I was so terrified I couldn't move. Rusty just stared at nothing and continued his snarl. Then, with a loud "Yeet!" he took off running down the hall and out of my sight. Thankfully, the dog's sharp cry brought my mom to my room to check things out. I told her what had happened, and she assured me I had made a simple mistake and it was my reaction and stress that freaked the dog out so much. Well, that seemed to settle me a bit, but I knew what I saw. I know there was a little girl standing in my bedroom door. A few days passed, and my parents and I had gone out for a movie and dinner. When we returned home, we were still laughing and talking about the movie Freaky Friday and how much fun it would be to swap bodies with each other for even just a day. I bounded down the hall to my room and stopped as I reached the threshold. There, strewn about my room, were the other dolls I had positioned on my shelf. The dolls were torn apart, fluff protruded from most of them. The heads were cracked or smashed. The only doll that seemed unfazed was the doll from the house down the street. She was on the floor, but she sat bolt upright. My parents came to see what I was so upset about. My dad walked farther down the hall and let out a loud laugh. We came running down to see what was going on, and our dog Rusty sat in the corner. His head lowered in a look of utter shame, like he used to do when he would have an accident in the house. Dad called out, "Hey, buddy, what did you do? What did you do?" Rusty just whimpered and lay down right in the spot he stood. Dad went over to scold the dog for tearing my collection apart, but this was so unlike Rusty. He never tore things apart, let alone my dolls or toys. We were flabbergasted. When Dad knelt to his side, he cradled Rusty's head in his hands and said sternly, "That's a naughty boy." When he pulled his hands back, he had slimy traces of dog drool and blood on them. He then examined the dog's mouth and found scratches all along the dog's gums, and many of them bleeding. "Oh, he got himself good chewing on your dolls, honey," Dad sympathetically called out to me. "He won't be doing that again." As Mom and I approached the room to clean the mess, we both stopped when we heard what sounded like a giggle come from my room. We both just stared at each other, frozen. Dad brushed past us, yelling out, "Well, excuse me," as he passed, laughing at his own silly imitation of Steve Martin. We walked into the room, picked up and threw out the mess, and I grabbed the doll ready to put the lone survivor back on the shelf when I noticed her hands. Her fingers were covered in slimy dog drool and blood. I told Mom I didn't want this doll in my room tonight, so we put her in Dad's study and we shut the door. We both knew we were acting silly, but it brought us some temporary comfort. Later that night, we all woke up to the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor from inside Dad's study. We stood outside the door listening and in complete shock. It sounded like little footsteps, then something heavy being dragged or pushed on the hardwood floor. Dad got between Mom and me and the door and yelled out, "I have a gun! You better get the hell out of my house!" Dad, of course, did not have a gun, and I wasn't too sure he was ready to barge in and do battle dressed in his boxers and a keep-on truckin' t-shirt and fuzzy slipper combo. Then, we all heard the giggle come from inside the room. Then the dragging noises stopped. Mom looked to Dad, and he looked surprised and whispered, "No goddamn way I'm going in there." We went back to my parents' room, locked the door, crawled into bed, and waited for the sun to rise. When it did, Dad, dressed more appropriately, went to the study to see what was going on. When he steadied himself by the door, faithful Rusty at his side, he tried to throw open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Something was up against the door, and Dad couldn't push past it. He and Rusty went outside, and Dad peered in the window, and all we heard was him exclaim, "Well, goddamn." It seems the only thing propped against that door was the doll, which was impossible. We had thrown her on a couch halfway across the room. Dad came back in determined to open the door. This time Rusty stayed far down the hall. Dad yelled out in a commanding voice, "Let me in the damned room!" and gave the door a huge shove, and it swung open effortlessly. The doll resting back on the couch where we had thrown it. Dad grabbed the doll out of the room and said, "That's it, this has to go." We followed him outside. He hopped in the car. We, of course, joined him to see what was going to happen. Rusty, relieved, just flopped in the yard in a sense of calmness. We drove down the block, my dad grumbling and mumbling the whole way, and he stopped abruptly in front of the remains of the house where workers were already lined up, ready to start clearing the area and bulldozing the structure. Dad hurled the doll at the house and stormed off to the car. We must have looked like a car full of lunatics. Dad climbed in behind the wheel, slammed the door, and we all turned to look, half expecting the demon doll to be following behind. That's when we saw the worker climb off the small dozer, walk over to the doll and pick it up, brush it off, and throw it in the cab of his vehicle. Mom said, "We should say something." Dad just retorted that it was their problem now, and we drove off to get something to eat. It took me almost 20 years before I would even walk past that area again. A new house was built and burned down a year later, almost to the date of the last fire. It sat vacant until just a few years ago when they began construction on a new house. And all I can say is, I wish them luck.